You know, I've gotten this question a lot. Can a modern integrated amp sound like a vintage one? Today, we're going to find out. So sit down, grab a cup of coffee, and let's talk about a brand new Yamaha integrated amp versus my favorite vintage Yamaha amp. So the one on the bottom here is my CR800. I think it is a 73, 74. So it's actually a 74. This thing is 2 years older than me, which puts it at 48 years old. This was a one owner product. And if you look at things, I actually have the spec sheet, entire printed manual, which I think is one of the coolest things ever. And then also a warranty card from Buena Park, California, when Yamaha used to have an office there. Heck, they still may have offices in Buena Park, California. If you know, drop it in the comments. But if you're new here, consider subscribing. We have over 400 videos, and we talk about everything from new equipment to old equipment, turntables, headphones, DACs, just about anything home theater. If you subscribe and you get in the comments at all, stay away from scammers. If there's someone that looks like me that says Telegram or WhatsApp, whatever it is, don't. Because I don't even know what those things are. It's not me. You haven't won anything, okay? Unfortunately. You could win an unauthorized access into your bank account. So I'm going to briefly go over the functionality of both the CR800 and the AS801. That's right, AS801. You have power button, speaker, A/B, and then you can run them party mode, A plus B. And then a mic of all things. So you have a mic input and a headphone output. So you have the mic level, which means you can do a little karaoke with this thing back in 74. Yeah. Bass, treble, loudness button. One of the greatest things to me for Yamaha is a variable loudness dial. So instead of just having a loudness button on or off, one can really dial in the loudness that they need. Not only that, what one is supposed to do to set the loudness button is first leave everything flat, turn up your stereo as loud as you can handle it, and then leave it there. And then you control volume using the loudness control. So you would set it all the way to the top, boop, boop, 0. And then as you wanted to go down in volume, you would use the loudness button to go down in volume and not the volume knob. Interesting, huh? All right, then we have the volume knob and the balance. Really cool thing about this receiver was it had a series of filters. So it had a high pass filter at 70, and then I believe something along the lines of a low pass filter. Yeah, so it has a high pass filter of 70 and then a low pass of around 20. And then it had another filter here. So basically rolled off the top and the bottom if you needed it to. Then stereo and mono had 2 tape inputs, 2 phono inputs, and then of course the tuner, and then 1 auxiliary input. Jam-packed with features from 1974. I think this was rated at 65 watts per channel, both channels driven. And back then they were pretty conservative with the power rating, so people didn't go crazy about just jamming a power rating on there for the sake of jamming a power rating on there. And actually later in the 70s into the early 80s, they had what were called the receiver wars. And that's when companies started throwing more and more power at things, like legit power. These things were super heavy. A very powerful Yamaha Pioneer Sansui, they go for $5,000-$10,000 at this point. Pioneer 1980, that's kind of the holy grail of vintage receivers. I've seen them for 10 grand. The AS801, let's see if we got any similarities here. All right, power button. Now, I heard someone say, well, I don't like the new because they have plastic dials. Yes, they do have plastic dials. But guess what else had plastic dials? Is the generation after the CR800. So the 20s, I think it was like the 820 or anyway, a generation or two, so not far removed, and I think it was still in the 70s, maybe into the early 80s. Plastic knobs, plastic switchers started to be put on these Yamahas. I know for a fact, whatever generation after this one, it does have a plastic button here. Plastic knobs have been used for 40 years, 30 years for sure. So we have a headphone output, speaker selector switch. The interesting thing about this speaker selector switch is you have A or B, all right? But then you have bi-wire mode, bi-amp mode, so A plus B. And I've never seen that in a stereo receiver. Bass, treble, balance, another loudness, variable loudness. So set the volume to what you want, and then you would control the volume with your loudness dial. Very interesting. And then a whole bunch of inputs. So USB, coaxial, actually has 2 tape loops as well. Phono stage, I think Bluetooth. Can't quite see. And then a CD direct button, and then a pure direct button. Pure direct button is going to shut down all tone controls and loudness. Also, comes with a very nice remote control. On this remote control, it appears to be metal, but what this really is that technique where they make plastic feel like aluminum. It's still, by all accounts, a very nice remote and not generic at all. Has the Yamaha logo down there at the bottom. Looks like you can put a CD player with it, and this will control it. Push button, it feels good. As far as mass market receivers go that are, less than $1,000, which incidentally, this is $900. As far as that goes, I believe this is one of the nicer remotes. I have no problem with this remote. Actually, I got the power rating totally wrong on the CR800. It's 45 watts into 8 ohms per channel. The AS801, that's hard to say. Harder than you think it would. That's 100 watts per channel into 8 ohms. I thought this was 65. It doesn't matter though. I mean, this is still a monster. It drove everything that I need, which is interesting. This thing's probably would measure around 65 watts. I don't know. I'm just talking on my rear end. On the back, I want to make sure we're in focus here. All right, because I'm going to kind of lean up here. So on the back, you have an external tuner input, which is pretty cool. Have the phono input right here. So there's an integrated phono amp, CD. You got a line and record, and then I believe that's just an auxiliary right there. So actually 2 spots for tape loop if you want to. So here's the DAC section. We have a coaxial in, optical in there, full-size USB, which I like a lot, and then a USB type A connection. And that's really important because if you have something like the Weem Mini Streamer or even your phone, you can actually charge it from the device itself. All right, then under there, subwoofer out, and then here's your speaker outputs. But again, 2 sets of speaker outputs. One can bi-amp, bi-wire, a single pair of speakers right through here with the switch of a button. And I don't think I've ever seen that, as I said before. So very cool feature if that is something that you want to do. And I don't normally bi-amp or bi-wire things because that functionality usually is on home theater receivers. But on something like this, I would actually take advantage of it if my speaker was bi-amp or bi-wire capable. It's got a 2-prong IEC connector. So yeah, built very well. Oh, it also looks like right here, there is a switch for impedance. So A or B 4 ohm speakers, A or B, or A plus B 8 ohm, A or B 6 ohm. Okay, so what it looks like here, if you want to run 2 speakers at the same time, I think they're recommending 8 ohm. Anyway, so there's a switch here that you can switch out depending upon the impedance of your speakers. Neither one of these are light receivers. CR800, the old one, about 30 plus pounds. This one still comes in around 25 pounds. When I pulled the AS801 out of the box, I was happy. Because generally, and I know this sounds strange, generally if it's a piece of electronics equipment and it's heavier, it means it's built better. And I know it's as simple as that, right? So I don't even need to do reviews. I just need to pick up things and weigh them. The amplifier that weighs the most wins, right? It doesn't always work out like that, but it isn't a bad sign when you're pulling an amp out of the box. You're like, ooh, okay, this is heavy. So the AS801, I'm just going to call it the 801 from now on. Obviously, you can see, not so much from this one, but from later generations when they started to have vertical knobs, you can see that this looks a little bit vintage in its styling. And I love that because I said at the beginning, I get asked a lot, are there any new amps that sound like vintage amps? And what I think the question is, are there any amps available today that have that dynamic, fun, punchy, sparkly, not necessarily V-shaped, but vintage stuff, and I don't want to paint with broad strokes, vintage stuff can have a sound to it. So I have some vintage Pioneers, some vintage Realistics, and I don't think they're the most neutral of amplifiers, but they sound good. They're crazy awesome, and even myself personally, I kind of chase a vintage sound, more dynamic, a little bit more punchy, a little bit sparklier on top, loudness buttons. I chase that when I'm getting a new piece of equipment. I have been looking for what I would consider to be a reference integrated amplifier for a while. And I was optimistic when I got the Yamaha, and I was like, this could be my new reference integrated amplifier. Power ratings. So I mentioned it before, 2 channels driven, 100 watts into 8 ohms, and I believe that is at 0.019% THD. So that's into 8 ohms. They do give a 6 ohm rating at 120 watts. They do not give a power rating at 4 ohms. However, they say it is 4 ohms stable. Usually it goes up. I don't know what the power rating is, but it's probably going to be north of 120 watts per channel. This does have a fully functioning DAC, and a good one at that. So it has the Sabre AS801 0K2M. I'm not super familiar with that chip. A lot of the other standalone DACs out there use a 9038 Q2M. Some stuff uses the Pro chip. The takeaway here is it uses a very good DAC chip. Another thing to note is this uses top art technology. Total pure audio reproduction technology. Combines a symmetrical circuit layout along with anti-resonance construction for high quality sound with minimum distortion. I'd believe them. You know, Yamaha is one of the only traditional brands that we still have around that I think is still like really serious about making 2-channel amplifiers. A lot of the other companies, they have 2-channel amplifiers. I don't know though. Out of Marantz Denon, which fundamentally is the same company because they're both out of Sound United. They say they're separate. Fine, they probably are separate, but they're still under the same umbrella. Then you have Onkyo and Pioneer at the Klipsch Group now. They did not go out of business. They are at the Klipsch Group. Yamaha, though, is kind of a holdout. They're still their own company. They still do their own thing. And they do it differently than a lot of people. I still think out of all the companies out there, Yamaha is kind of doing things the same way they've done them for a while. So when they say, hey, we got this top art stuff, I have a tendency to believe them and get more excited about something like that than if it was coming from maybe another company. Then a pure direct mode. Pure direct mode, like I said before, basically turns off all the tone controls and everything else. Shortest signal path. Ooh, when I first turned this on and I kept everything in the flat position, no tone controls, no loudness button, just straight. It was very clear, and it reminded me of the, Rotel A11, and that's at 50 watts a channel. I really, really liked the Rotel. Similar sound, clean, maybe not as dynamic as some other amps that I've heard, and probably cleaner than something like an Emotiva PT1 or TP, Toilet Paper 1. Sounds like a really bad Star Wars character ship. TP1. No, the TA1. Yes, that's the integrated amplifier from Emotiva. This is cleaner. Okay, cleaner. Maybe less punchy on the bottom, but we can work with that because we have not only tone controls, but a loudness dial. So out of the box, thought this sounded like the A11. And I think that 2-channel amplifier, which does have no DAC, comes in around the same price. So we're getting a fully functioning DAC for about the same price as with the A11. Let me find out what. So it's $100 less. The A11 Tribute is $800. There goes my phone. This is $900. So for that extra $100, well, you're getting a DAC. You're getting a heck of a lot more power too, and more functionality. Now with the variable loudness button, I was able to dial this into a very punchy, very robust, very rich sound, and I liked it. I got it close to the Yamaha CR800. Not quite there, but I got it close. But on the flip side of that, when my vintage is going, as it's running for longer and longer, there's the noise floor just keeps going. I start getting a hum. Now I need to go get it repaired, but I don't know anybody that I trust at this point or that charges a fair rate. There's one guy around here. He's $600. What? Because I only paid like $400 for this anyway. That's another story. I just got through doing a video comparing this to the T9. It's a $130 integrated amplifier. Now the thing about this one is it only has one RCA, but it does have a fully functioning DAC in it. It has a Bluetooth and some other stuff. Has an aux out, so if you want to hook up a subwoofer, you could. I compared sound quality, and they were very close. Very, very close as far as sound signature. However, I had to talk this one into sounding similar to the 801 in a stock form with no tone controls. In that combination, I was very surprised at just how closely I could get these two to sound. It doesn't have the power. T9 does not have the power, nor does it even remotely approach having the power as the Yamaha. The Yamaha is not, in my opinion, at its best when it is just going flat without loudness controls. I didn't particularly care for the sound of the pure direct mode. I probably need to play around with it with more speakers, but I had the ELAC Unify 2.0s. I had the ELAC Unify Reference, Klipsch RP500M, and then the Polk Reserve 100s. All in here. Had zero issue driving any of them. I actually think this is going to drive most speakers, save for maybe like the Magnapan LRS or something like that. Out of all the amplifiers I've had in-house, this is probably one of the beefier receivers. It's not a receiver, it's an integrated amp. There's no tuner. I wish they would almost put something like a fake or like a throwback homage to a tuner section, even if it's not a tuner, just a DAC section, maybe some lights. That would be really cool. How, as it is though, this is still one of the most beautiful throwback designs that an integrated amplifier has. So I can't complain there. All right, down here you got lights for your DACs, PCM and DSD and stuff like that. I don't want to talk about that. I want to talk about how they sound. When I started dialing in the loudness, when I started using the loudness the way I should be using it, because for a long time, I didn't even know that you were supposed to set the volume and forget it, and then control volume with a loudness button or dial. I didn't know that. So I was constantly changing that around depending upon what volume I was at to begin with. And I will say with that, you can still, it still wasn't quite to my taste, so I did start to mess with it a little bit more. And you know what I really notice is when I get it to a volume that I like, the more I turn it, the bassier, punchier it gets. And that, if you look at the frequency graphs of my old CR800, when you have the loudness at flat, it's legit flat. As you go, you start to dip more of the mid-range out, and then finally the last one, the bass is a little bit higher up than the treble. V-shaped, which is interesting because back in the 80s and 90s when I had an equalizer and I would do EQ, was almost a bit of a V curve. So what I think I was doing is just applying a loudness button. Something like this. So I believe this is as close as you're going to get to a vintage receiver as far as sound. You're going to have to search for it. You're going to have to dial it in. You're going to have to experiment But I was able to get the 801, AS801, to sound similar to the CR800. CR800 is a very balanced amp back in the 70s, though. The Pioneers, the Realistics, I think the Sansuis, a little bit more dynamic maybe out of the box. But I still love this is probably my favorite vintage receiver. I love this thing. I love it. I love it. I need to get it fixed. It's not broken. I need to get it worked on. Renewed, I guess. Something like that. I guess I wish it was cheaper. I wish it was $800. They do have a different version. I think it's the 701. I dropped my phone. 701. And it's a Sans DAC. So there's no DAC in the 701. And I think it's a little bit lower power. So I think we go from 100 watts to 85 watts. Oh, I would be remiss had I not talked about the phono stage. I didn't particularly care for it. I had the Project E1 in-house, and it has an integrated phono preamp. And I almost didn't even test the integrated phono preamp because I have never had a phono preamp in the table that sounds better than an integrated phono amp in the integrated amp. But I tested it, cover all my bases, and lo and behold, the phono preamp in the Project E1 was better, more dynamic, punchier than the phono preamp in the Yamaha. It does have a phono preamp. I don't think it's super dynamic though, but you have tone controls, you have variable loudness, kind of dial things in. But if you're a vinyl aficionado and you're looking at this amp, you may want to budget for an external phono preamp. Just my 2 cents. You can get away with it. It's going to be fine, especially with all the freedom to dial in things. But I think there's a lot better out there. Schmidt Manny. Heck, even the U-Turn Pluto 2, and then of course the iFi Zen Phono, I think are all great options, all under $200. So I really like this amp. Now I like it with loudness and tone controls going to dial it in how I like it. Very clear, effortlessly powerful, beautiful to look at, sounds good out of the box. I enjoy picking my own DAC, though. So if I was going to go in this direction, I may take a hard look at the 701. Similar functionality, no DAC. There is also a line underneath this. I think it's the 301, the 501. Much cheaper, but I don't think they have that top art, I don't know, construction. But there is a shift. So there's a lower tier. They look the same, lower tier, and then it goes up to the 701 and the 801. And I think there's some different things going on inside the 701 and the 801 versus the other crop of more affordable. For me personally, I'm probably not dipping down into that lower tier. Although I'd love to hear it, I would probably stick with this. And now I'm really on the fence because I have separates that I really enjoy. I have separates that I would consider to be reference pieces. I don't have any integrated amps that I would consider to be reference pieces. This one is in the running. I'm getting the Audio Lab in, which I think comes in, it's more expensive. I think that comes in retail around $1,200. I will at least be able to test it to a similarly priced integrated amp that has similar functionality. I have the Buchart, but that only has one RCA input. It has DSP. Not really apples to apples. I just want a regular integrated amp. Has a DAC in it. 2-channel. No magicy. It's not that I don't like magicy. I thought the Buchart sounded great, but I need something to compare this to. I'm really rambling on. The takeaway here is the Yamaha AS801 is a compelling piece of equipment. It has a lot of functionality. It's going to give you probably everything. 2 tape loops? Come on. Going to give you probably everything you need. And even though the price is $900, I think it's fair if you're going to use everything. If you're not going to use the DAC, if you already have an external DAC, probably the 701 is the way to go. So if you want to support the channel, you can sign up for Patreon. Patreon.com/CheapAudioMan. Every Sunday night, we do Patreon-only Zooms. We have a Patreon-only Facebook group, a Patreon-only Discord group, and server, and then I give stuff away to certain tiers. You can also sign up for Amazon Music or Tidal. Links in the description. If you click and sign up, I do get a commission, a couple of bucks, even if it's for a trial. You can also use the links to the AS801. Probably not going to have a link to the CR800. If you click and you buy, I will get a commission, but it doesn't cost you any more. Great way to support the channel. You can also use the thanks button down below the video, underneath, next to the share button. There's a little thanks, a little heart with a money sign. If you got any value out of this video and you want to give me a buck or two, buy me a cup of coffee, you certainly can, but don't feel compelled to give anything. I appreciate you watching. So don't binge watch anything on Netflix or Hulu. Binge listen, maybe, through your new Yamaha AS801 that comes in silver or black, and fill your soul with happiness. And with that, I'm Randy. I'm the Cheap Audio Man.